What is happiness, to an economist at least? Economics is about understanding how humans should make decisions. Happiness, in this sense, is just a way of us understanding which set of options we prefer. Saying that we prefer 2 oranges to 1 orange is a way of saying that 2 oranges makes us happier than 1 orange. If we make some assumptions about happiness, we can develop tools to understand decision making. Imagine a function for happiness based on the number of oranges we have. What could this look like? Well, of course, everyone has their own taste, but we normally assume that more of something is at least slightly better, so the curve should have an upward slope. Even if you're not a big fan of oranges, you'd probably prefer 2 oranges to 1 orange. But the amount that the second orange made you happy is probably less than the first one. And if you have 20 oranges already, you really don't care about the 21st orange. So the increase of the slope should be declining. We can already imagine that our happiness function looks something like this. We call this diminishing marginal utility, since the happiness, or utility as economists call it, of getting one more is positive, but the rate of increase is declining. It's not always true, but it's a good starting point. It may have a higher or lower value depending on how much you like oranges, but the absolute value here doesn't really matter too much. We can never actually measure happiness, so we don't really need to put a unit on it. The concept becomes more interesting thinking about trade-offs between different options. Let's imagine you're choosing between bananas and oranges, picking a point somewhere in this chart. A useful tool for understanding this decision is known as the indifference curve. This is a curve which represents all the options that would give you the same level of happiness. That is, you're indifferent between all of the options on this curve. Personally, I prefer oranges, so my curve might look something like this. I would be just as happy to get 5 oranges and 5 bananas, or 6 oranges and 3.5 bananas. See how the curve tends to get steeper at each end? This means that when I already have tons of oranges, I wouldn't mind giving up a lot of them for a little bit of banana, or vice versa. It's the same concept as before, with diminishing marginal utility in my enjoyment of each individual fruit. We can think of the region to the southwest of the indifference curve as options I wouldn't prefer. I would rather have 5 oranges and 5 bananas than 4 oranges and 6 bananas. The options to the northeast are all preferred to any points on the curve. I would prefer 6 oranges and 4 bananas to 5 oranges and 5 bananas. The indifference curve divides all possible options into preferred options, less preferred options, and options I'm indifferent about. There are infinitely many of these indifference curves, which you can imagine as contours on a hill of happiness. As I travel northeast in the region, I'm getting options that I would prefer more and more. So far, this isn't particularly useful. That's because we haven't talked about the other side of the picture, constraints. Economics without constraints has a boring conclusion: consume everything. However, unfortunately, the world is finite. We don't have infinite money, so we have to choose. Let's say we have $10 and we want to buy some fruit. Bananas are $2 and oranges are $1. Therefore, we can afford any of the combinations that are in this region. Consider the option if I purchase 4 bananas and 2 oranges. I can draw my indifference curve from this line, and we can see this region represents fruit combinations which are both affordable and preferred. This means I shouldn't choose 4 bananas and 2 oranges, because I can choose a better option. My optimal choice is simple to find mathematically. I just have to find the indifference curve that is exactly tangent to the budget constraint. In this case, I should choose 6.5 oranges and 1.5 bananas. I'm assuming a world where we can buy fractional amounts of fruits, by the way. At this point, by definition, all of the options I would prefer to this choice would be unaffordable. They're not in the budget region. And all of the choices I can afford apart from this, I don't prefer them. Where this gets interesting is that this can hold for any set of prices. So if the price of bananas goes down, my previous choice is no longer optimal. Now I can afford all of these combinations, which give me more happiness. This is how my choices would change: spend a lot more on bananas and reduce my orange spending a little. If I know my indifference curves, I can always solve for the goods I should buy. find the indifference curve tangent to the budget constraint. We can move away from my very vanilla fruit preferences too. What would indifference curves look like for someone who can't stand oranges? Well, they would be indifferent between the number of oranges they have. They'll just throw them away. And they would only care about their bananas, so their curves are horizontal. This person, unsurprisingly, shouldn't spend any of their money on oranges and just buys bananas to reach their highest indifference curve. These boundary conditions are one of the exceptions to the tangent rule. If I'm consuming only one of the options, then my indifference curve is no longer tangent to the budget constraint. The shape of the indifference curves can be used to represent a wide variety of preferences and different levels of complementarity between goods. These curves represent somebody who's pretty indifferent between oranges and bananas, whereas these curves represent someone who cares much more about bananas than oranges while still maintaining some level of consumption of oranges. We can see this because the horizontal nature of the curves represents that they would be indifferent between many oranges and few bananas, or trading all of these oranges just for a little bit more of banana. Likewise, we can draw these curves for someone who cares much more about oranges than bananas. These combinations of two goods can be plotted against happiness, or utility as economists like to call it, in a 3D space. The indifference curves we saw before were contours on this surface, representing combinations of goods with the same height in the utility space. Utility is one of the fundamental concepts in microeconomics. It gives us a tool for modeling decision making, and we've only just scratched the surface. That gives me something to be happy about.